The
What?
sun dipped low across a quiet
What?
American town,
What?
painting the horizon in streaks of
Oh my
fire, as
goodness.
if the sky itself sensed something dreadful was about to unfold. The last echoes of day faded into silence when it began, sirens wailing, boots hammering against dry earth, and chaos swelling like a storm nobody had invited. At the center of a deserted field stood a figure that should have commanded reverence, not ridicule. A United States Army general, one of the highest-ranking women ever to wear the uniform, a symbol of sacrifice and iron will. Yet tonight she was dragged like a criminal, her wrists bound with coarse rope, her body forced against a tree as police officers. The very men sworn to uphold justice laughed in her face. Her medals, ribbons, and honors glistened under the last light, mocking her captors with a reminder of everything she had given for a nation now betraying her. The officers circled, sneering, drunk on false power, hurling insults as though humiliating her could erase what she represented. But her lips did not tremble from fear. They trembled from fury. Because she knew something these men could not begin to imagine. One signal from her hand, one call carried across encrypted channels, and an entire army, the soldiers she had led through fire and death, would descend like thunder. And when they came, justice would not whisper. It would roar, unstoppable and merciless. The field fell eerily still for a moment, the kind of silence where even the wind seems to wait. And in that silence a storm began to awaken. The officers shoved her harder against the tree, tightening the ropes until her skin burned. One spat near her boots, sneering, "So this is your mighty general. Out here you belong to us." Their laughter cracked across the empty field, ugly and hollow. Yet they did not see her hand shift ever so slightly beneath her sleeve. Strapped against her wrist was a device so small it looked insignificant until she pressed it. In an instant, a silent pulse shot skyward, leaping from satellites to command centers, a cry for help too encrypted for her captors to detect. It was invisible, unheard by them, but it carried the weight of war. At that very moment, analysts across the country saw red alarms flare. Secure screens blinked alive, coordinates locking onto a field no one expected. "General Avery's beacon," one voice shouted, and within seconds orders crashed like waves. Boots thundered inside hangars. Helicopter blades roared awake, engines of armored convoys snarled like beasts ready to hunt. Across the nation, soldiers who had once served under her command clenched their fists, rage searing their hearts. They remembered her voice in the darkest nights of war, her refusal to abandon anyone, her courage that had pulled them from despair. Not one of them would abandon her now. But back in the field, the officers remained oblivious, tightening ropes and dragging dirt across her uniform, mocking the very cloth they were unworthy to touch. "Where's your army now?" one taunted. She lifted her chin, eyes blazing. "Closer than you think," she whispered, a calm so sharp it chilled the air. Beneath their laughter, the ground began to tremble. At first, the tremor was faint, so faint the officers ignored it. But then came the distant rumble of engines, carried by the wind like the growl of thunder too near to dismiss. The general's eyes stayed fixed on the horizon, unbroken by the pain biting into her wrists. Her memories flickered with every heartbeat. Comrades who had fallen in deserts and jungles, nights when the odds had been impossible but surrender had never been an option. Tonight was no different. She was not simply a woman tied to a tree. She was a soldier, a leader, a warrior. And warriors do not break. The officers, oblivious to history unfolding around them, continued their mockery. One pulled at her medals, dangling them like trophies. Another raised his phone, recording her humiliation, preparing to flaunt it online. Yet as the camera lens captured her face, it also captured her eyes, unyielding, steady, blazing with a fire no rope could extinguish. She spoke softly, her voice calm and chilling. "Enjoy this moment because it will be the last you own." The man scoffed, then froze as a low roar split the horizon. Lights flickered in the distance, row upon row, headlights of armored vehicles cutting through the dark. Helicopters slashed across the sky, their blades roaring louder with every second. The officers' grins faltered. The air shifted, charged like a battlefield seconds before detonation. And in that instant, their laughter died, replaced by the creeping dread of men who realized they had not broken a general. They had awakened an army. The horizon exploded into motion. Convoys of steel thundered across the earth, headlights blazing like a wall of fire. Helicopters roared above, rotors slicing the silence with authority, their floodlights cutting across the trembling field. Soldiers poured out in perfect formation, their boots striking the dirt with the rhythm of judgment, weapons raised, sights locked. The once quiet night now shook with the might of a military machine unleashed. The officers stumbled back, their arrogance draining as fast as their color. Their taunts withered on their lips, their hands twitching uselessly at their sides. Floodlights snapped on, searing the field into daylight. And at the center, still bound, still unbroken, the general raised her head proudly. Her voice rang out steady, unshaken by ropes or cruelty. "This uniform is not cloth. It is a promise you broke and one they will now enforce." Her words cut like steel, and the soldiers roared in answer, a sound so thunderous it rattled the ground, a sound no mockery could ever silence. The officers realized too late they had not staged a humiliation. They had staged their own reckoning. Their field of laughter had become a battlefield of justice. The officers who had strutted moments ago now stood paralyzed, their confidence dissolving into raw fear as the earth shook under the march of soldiers. Rifles rose in unison, red laser sights cutting across the night like burning eyes, locking onto every corrupt cop who dared breathe too loudly. The general, still bound, never flinched. Her silence alone carried more weight than their shouts had moments earlier. And then it came, the order. A commander's voice thundered across the chaos, sharp, unyielding, undeniable. "Untie her, now!" Every officer froze, their faces drained of color, their arrogance collapsing into panic. They hesitated, but hesitation meant nothing against the ring of rifles aimed at them, against the storm that had descended on this once quiet field. One by one, hands shook, bravado fell like broken masks, and ropes loosened. But before the soldiers could free her completely, desperation reared its head. One officer, his pride cracking into madness, yanked a hidden pistol from his belt. His hand trembled as he pointed it, not at the soldiers surrounding him, but at the general herself, a final act of spite, a last attempt to control what he never truly owned. For a heartbeat, the world held still. Engines growled. Soldiers tensed. The general locked her eyes on him, cold and fearless. Then the crack of a sniper's shot ripped the night apart. The pistol spun harmlessly into the dirt, the officer collapsing with a scream, his wrist shattered, his arrogance obliterated. Chaos erupted as soldiers slammed the rest of the officers to the ground with brutal precision. Shouts turned to cries, laughter turned to silence, and with a single motion of a blade, the ropes binding the general fell away. She staggered forward, rubbing her raw wrists, and as every soldier's eyes locked on her with fury burning in their chests, she raised her hand, not for violence but for silence, because what came next would echo beyond this battlefield. Her voice cut through the night like thunder, firm, resonant, carrying the weight of history. They thought they could bind me, humiliate me, strip me of dignity, but they forgot something. She raised her bruised wrists high, proof of her ordeal, proof of her endurance. I am not one woman, I am an army. I am every soldier who has ever bled for this flag, every family who has sacrificed, every life given for freedom. And tonight, justice is not mine alone, it is ours. A roar erupted from the soldiers, so fierce, so deafening, it felt as though the earth itself trembled beneath their loyalty. The captured officers shrank into the dirt, the weight of judgment pressing harder than the ropes they had used against her. Floodlights burned brighter, drones circled above broadcasting the scene live to command centers, newsrooms, and homes across the nation. Millions watched, millions listened. Veterans saluted through tears, children whispered in awe, and citizens who had lost faith in justice felt a spark reignite. This was not just a rescue. It was a resurrection of honor, a reminder that corruption could not bury truth forever. The general stood taller, her voice steady, unwavering. She turned to the disgraced officers, their badges glinting in shame. You wore the badge of law, but you broke it. You used power not to protect, but to destroy. And now the whole world will see you for what you are. Her words were not shouted, but they struck like artillery, impossible to ignore, impossible to deny. Soldiers closed ranks, boots pounding the dirt in thunderous rhythm, their unity drowning out the cries of the disgraced men. And as the sound rolled across the field, it was clear. This night would not be remembered for her humiliation. It would be remembered for her defiance. The scene transformed into something greater than justice. It became a symbol. Armored vehicles formed a steel wall around the field. Helicopters hovered low, their spotlights searing down, exposing every coward who had thought themselves untouchable. The once smirking officers now knelt in the dirt, their hands bound, their faces pale beneath the blinding light of exposure. The general stood at the center of it all, her uniform torn, her medals smeared with dust, but her bearing unshaken. She raised her chin, speaking not only to those present but to a nation listening. Dignity is not yours to take, she declared, her voice rising above the roar of engines and the hum of choppers. It is mine, forged in sacrifice, and tonight you will learn the meaning of true power. The soldiers roared again, but it was not the roar of vengeance. It was the roar of loyalty, of gratitude, of shared sacrifice remembered. The floodlights locked on the disgraced officers' faces, and as drones broadcast the images, millions saw their arrogance collapse under the weight of truth. For the general's words had struck deeper than any weapon. They reminded every listener that while ropes can bind a body, they cannot bind a spirit. And in that moment, the general was not just a soldier. She was the living embodiment of resilience, of leadership, of unshakable honor. Her soldiers knew it, the nation knew it, and even the trembling men at her feet knew it. Because no matter what humiliation they had planned, her spirit had turned it into a reckoning they could never escape. The night that began with betrayal ended in triumph. The general stood unbroken, a warrior whose spirit had summoned an army, whose voice had reignited a nation. Around her, soldiers stood firm, their discipline a wall stronger than any rope, their loyalty louder than any insult. The disgraced officers, once arrogant in their cruelty, now knelt as living proof that corruption cannot outlast honor, that betrayal cannot silence truth. The field itself became a stage where justice roared, where millions bore witness to the fact that courage, when tested, does not crumble, it rises. And for those listening tonight, this story is more than entertainment. It is a reminder that dignity, sacrifice, and honor are not fragile. They are unbreakable. Just as one general's call brought forth an unstoppable army, your voice, your choices, your loyalty to what is right can spark change in the world around you. Because true power is never in cruelty, it is in resilience. And if this story gripped you, if it stirred something within you, then don't let it end here. Stay with us, subscribe, and join a community where stories of courage, justice, and defiance against corruption come alive every week. Hit the like button if this story moved you. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that honor still stands tall. And turn on the bell so you never miss the next story that will keep you on the edge of your seat. This was not just a story, it was a battle cry. And the question is, when justice calls, will you answer,